Hi guys, welcome back to the Big Sew Along. I'm Jenny, and as always, I thank you very much for choosing to spend some time with me this week. I also want to thank you all for such lovely birthday messages last week. That was very nice of you. I also want to thank Franny because this week we are doing a sew along for the Merchant & Mills Scout shirt and dress, and this pattern was very kindly gifted to me by Franny probably about a year ago. I don't know what's going on. Every time I try to record something these days, somebody decides to pull out the weed whacker, so I hope you guys can't hear that. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. Thank you so much, Franny. This is a shirt I have really wanted for a long time, and I wanted to make it ever since you sent it to me, and I am really glad that you did because I love it. This is a size 12. I made no alterations to the pattern whatsoever, except that I did shorten it. I made the dress version, not the shirt version. I added patch pockets instead of inseam pockets, and just for reference, you'll see them at the end, but for reference, my pockets were finished size of my pockets was 9.5 inches by 9.5 inches. Let's see, I clearly don't have my buttons on yet. I really like this buttoned up all the way to the top, but I will get my buttons on this afternoon because I'm off to my New York trip tomorrow, and I will be taking this with me. Alright, I apologize in advance. This is a very long video because there are a lot of things to go through. So, to make it easy for you guys, I will definitely put timestamps down below. There are probably plenty of things that you already know how to do that you can just skip over. That way also, if there's something you need to refer back to, it'll be easier for you. Now, I do show how to do the sleeves that come with this pattern, even though I didn't put those on this shirt. I did not show the patch pockets on the front or the inseam pockets because I didn't use those, and I don't think you guys need my help with those, so I just didn't do those. I also, to keep this as short as possible, I cut out simple things like side seams, but you'll see as we go along. Alright, let's just get to this video. Alright, there's the front of our shirt. Now, the first thing we're supposed to do is put our patch pockets on up here. If you're using them, go ahead and do that. I'm not using them, so we'll just move on to the next thing, which is putting this pleat in right here. You will notice on the back side, I'm not sure, I don't remember them saying this in the instructions, but whenever I'm making a placket, I like to put interfacing around the edge. It just has to be big enough to cover your seam allowances around these three edges, okay? Then we're just going to fold this in half. Once we have that done, we're going to sew a basting stitch right here. And it's going to go straight down from the edge of your placket here, straight down. And we're just going to go, I mean, on this one I'm probably going to go just to the bottom of this interfacing, but just so you know, you're going to want to do that about, you know, maybe an inch and a half. Okay, once we have that basted shut, we're going to lay this flat. And then we're going to press our pleat open, and we're just going to make sure that this crease in the center of our pleat lines up exactly with the center of our shirt. Mine looks like it's off a little bit. Right there. And then we're going to sew this down. And we're going to sew it down 5/8 of an inch from this cut edge of our pleat. So right here. And we're not going to go further than the pleat. We're just going to sew on the pleat. Okay, that's what we look like now. You can see my little stitching right there. From the back, it looks like that. Okay? Now, we're going to put this back to the front, and we're going to work on our plackets. Now, before we get started, a couple of things. You have a right front and a left front. And you'll see that the pattern piece says to interface to the center. I always interface about 1/4 of an inch past that, because if you have interfacing that covers the center crease, you're going to get a crisper, sharper edge, I think. I have also, on the right hand side, I've also marked my buttonholes with tailor tacks. I almost never use tailor tacks, but in this case, I think it's important because these plackets are going to get a lot of pressing. and moving around, and if you put your marks on with any other way, I think they're probably just going to come off before you're ready to use them. The other thing I've done is on both of these pieces, I have folded under my seam allowance on the non-interfaced side. Okay, so let's get started on the right hand side, which is this one. We're gonna match this up to our front edge, just like that. And we're going to sew this down with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and we want to sew exactly to where this stitch line is, okay? I'm going to go ahead and mark this so you guys can see, and also so I can see. We're going to sew right to there, and we're going to stop right at that line. You definitely want to be sure you back tack there. Alright, that's what we look like so far. Now we're going to do the exact same thing on this side. So I'm going to put this right here. I'm doing this upside down so you guys can see, but it's a little awkward for me. Okay, there you go. So again, we want this to end exactly where that stitching line is. So we're just going to fold this back, make a mark with our chalk, and we're going to end stitching right there. Okay, that's our plackets on. The only thing I've done is I folded these to the front and gave them a good press along the seam. I just think it's easier to do that right now. And also it needs to be pressed for the next step. Same thing on this side, okay? Alright, so now the part that's a little bit scary, I'm going to flip this around so you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm going to get these plackets out of the way. And I'm going to go in here. Now they tell you in the directions to try not to clip the pleat in the back. I don't think that really matters, so I'm not going to worry about that. What I don't want to cut is my placket piece, any of this. Alright, sorry. I just noticed that my plackets and stitching ends right here and right here. That original stitching I made ends right here and right here. So before I cut anything, I need these two lines of stitching to intersect. So I'm just going to go back to my sewing machine and I'm going to add a couple of stitches to each end of this original stitching that I had. Alright, so I went in and fixed that. I hope you guys can see this. So this row of stitching that we used to hold our pleat down needs to match up with the rows of stitching we used to hold our placket down, and they need to meet right at that intersection. If they don't meet and you cut this open, you're probably going to end up with a little hole here at the corner of your placket. Okay, so just double check before you cut anything. Let's turn this around. Now I just need to be sure we're not getting this placket when we cut. So we're just going to go from the corner here right to that intersection. And then the same thing on this side. Alright, now we're going to start on this side, which is the left side as you're wearing it. We're just going to fold this over. I'm going to turn this to the wrong side. We want to fold this over so that it just covers our stitch line. And we're going to give it a good press. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And it does get a little fidgety down here where your opening is, but don't worry about it. You can just push it all to the back for right now and press it in place. Okay, so that's the back side, one side and the other side. And now we're going to flip this over, and from the right side we're going to stitch in the ditch on both of these on both sides. And we're going to go, we want to be sure that we start and stop right here at this intersection, right there. And you also want to be sure that you're catching your placket all the way up. And you're going to do the same thing on both sides. Okay, so that's our placket almost finished, you guys. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to flip this over, and on this left side, the instructions tell you to just serge this bottom edge off. And so that is what I'm going to do. Looks like mine moved a little bit, but I think that will be okay. We're just going to serge that right off. Alright, so again, this is from the front. Let's look at this from the back. this is the left-hand side done, and you can see I did go back and fix that, and that's the serged off edge. Okay, so now we need to do the right front, and to do that, we're going to lay this down. This left-hand side goes at the very bottom. And then you're going to have this little wedge where your pleat is and your little cutout triangle is. And you want to line that up as best you can. Then we're going to lay this flat like this, and then just flip it to the front. So it's like that. And now you want to line these up. So these are exactly in line, and you want this fold right here to be exactly where your stitching line is, okay? It wants to shift a little bit. This is why I like to put that basting stitch in here. In the pleat, it sort of helps stabilize that a little bit. It's still going to be shifty, so be careful. We're going to go through all of these layers, and we're going to stitch right exactly where our previous stitching line is. So it should be 5/8 of an inch away from this edge, right where I put that chalk line. Okay? Be really careful to not go further than the placket, and be sure you back stitch on both sides. Otherwise, it's going to be really easy for that to come apart. Okay, once we have that done, that's our seam inside. We're going to trim that down. It's pretty thick, so you may want to grate it. Just like that. Actually going to clip off this corner a little bit so it doesn't peek out the side. I think we'll be okay there. And then we're just going to fold this up, give it a really good press, and then the instructions say to just sew a rectangle at the bottom here. Before you do that, make sure that your edges are aligned up here, okay? All right, so I'm going to give this another press, and then you can really put your marks wherever you want. I'm going to do mine at about 1 inch. So I'm going to just sew it down right there and around the edges, and I'll be done. Alright, that's our placket finished. If you still have any basting stitches from our original pleat coming down here, mine are completely either disappeared or covered up by the placket, so I don't have any. But if you sewed your placket down a little bit further, you may have basting stitches that are showing here. You can go ahead and get rid of those. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the back piece, and we have 2 pieces here, the back panel and this thing which is called the hanging loop. I've already gone ahead and made mine. You're just going to fold this in half like this, and then fold each of those halves in like so, and edge stitch that edge. Okay, that's your hanging loop. Easy peasy. Now this back has another box pleat, so it's essentially the same as the box pleat on the front. So I'm not exactly sure why we're doing it differently, but I'll tell you, you're supposed to match up these notches like so, and then stitch it down. Okay, that's a little fiddly for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mark midway between these 2 notches. This is 1 1/4 inch, so I'm going to use this side over here. It is 1 1/4 inch between these 2 notches. Midway between that is 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to mark this at 5/8 of an inch, and that would be right there. I'm just going to use my chalk, make a line. Now I'm going to fold this in half. And once again, I am going to go to my sewing machine, and I'm going to baste this down just 1 inch or 2. Okay, that's my pleat. And now you can see, if I lay that flat, so that center line matches my stitch line, that is going to be exactly, make my notches match exactly. And now we can go in there and stitch across, right across here, and we're not going to have anything shifting about, okay? Once we do that, I'm going to take our little loop, and we're going to place it right over right over the fold on this side and also on this side. Whoops. Make sure you don't twist it, just like that. And we're going to stitch that down at 5/8 of an inch all the way across, and we're going to go up through, obviously through the loop and through the pleat and through the shirt. Okay, next up is the yoke. And in this pattern, they do not tell you to do this by the burrito method, but that is the one that I prefer. So that's the one I'm going to do. I feel like you probably don't need a burrito method tutorial because they are all over the place all the time. But since I have to do it for my shirt anyway, I will go ahead and show you how I do it. So I'm going to put one yoke on the wrong side of my back, and I'm going to put one on the front. I'm going to match them up. Alright, now that I have that pinned in place, I'm just going to start from one end and go to the other. So with my 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to press both pieces out. Okay, so this is what our yoke looks like so far. This is the right side. You can see I've trimmed my seam allowances down. I've graded and trimmed. And this is the back. Now, remember that basting stitch we used to hold our pleat in place? Now is a good time to get rid of that. Then we're going to lay this back with the right side out, and we're going to take our front shirt and lay it right side down, and we're going to pin these shoulders to the outside piece. This inside yoke just gets folded to the back, let it lay flat. We're going to pin these together and then sew them with our 5/8 inch seam allowances. Okay, so those are our shoulder seams sewn together. This is the inside of the back, so the inside yoke, and this is the inside of the front. Now we're not going to trim or press these seams yet. What we're going to do is pick it up at the shoulders like this. Lay that back yoke backwards on the table. And then I'm going to push mine up so you're not going to be able to see the whole thing at once, but it's just like this. I'm just pushing it up. And then I'm going to start right here at the bottom, at the very bottom of my dress. And I'm just going to roll all of this together. When you get to the top, you're going to see this yoke piece facing up towards you. You want to, this is a lot of fabric because mine is the dress, but you want to get this pretty tight, because what we're going to do is pull this up like this and pin those together. And right now I'm just going to put 2 pins in here because I want to actually sew this from the other side. I'm going to flip it over because this way I can stitch right exactly along my previous stitch line and make sure everything is nice and even and lined up. Now once you get this sewn together here, you can go ahead and trim these seam allowances down. Alright, so there's our burrito roll. You can see that I have very oddly trimmed and graded my seam allowances. And now we're just going to pull this out from the center. And that is what our yoke looks like. Now we can go ahead and give that a good press right there and right there. And once you have that done, you're going to want to baste your neck hole so you don't get any stretching for the next part, which is our collar. For the first part of our collar, we have 2 pieces. We have a top collar, which is this one, the one with the interfacing, and we have the bottom collar, the one without the interfacing. I have already marked my collar. I usually do this when I have something that I want really good points on. I marked on the top, you can see, I marked the seam allowances around my corners. So we're going to put these together, right sides together. The bottom collar is going to be a tiny bit smaller so that it rolls to the back side. But just so you can see, like when I get up to this, like when I get up close to this corner, I'm going to knock my stitch length down a couple of notches, so I'm using a pretty small stitch. And right when I get like just about like a stitch away from this corner, I'm going to go on a diagonal this way with one stitch and then pivot and go around this way. Once you get here, you can lengthen your stitch length again to its normal length, but then you're going to want to do the same thing over here. You don't have to mark your corners, but I find when I do this, I get a much cleaner and more even collar. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll be back. Okay, I have my collar sewn together, and you can see I've already graded and trimmed my seam allowances. Now for the corners, I like to do this. I like to go at an angle like that, and then I'm going to flip it over and go at an angle like this. The longer this clip is, instead of just going straight across the corner, this just allows you to remove more of the fabric from the sides that might get stuck up in that corner. Like a lot of times people will just cut right across like this, but that just leaves a lot of extra fabric on the sides here. That's hard to get turned into a tiny corner. So like that. Then I'm going to press all these seams open, turn it right side out, give it another press, and then we'll move on. Here's our collar finished. I feel like my points look pretty good. They look pretty even. After you get this put together, you're going to base this the raw edges on the inside together, and then you're going to edge stitch all the way around the edge. And usually I put a pin on the interface side so I don't get mixed up later, because that's the outside of my collar. Alright, now we're going to move on to the collar stand. I do this a little bit differently than they tell you to in the instructions, so I'll just show you how I do it, and you can choose to do it however you like. I start with the collar stand that's going to be on the inside. Is that right? Yes, the inside. And I've pressed up my seam allowance, and this is literally just a shade under my 5/8 inch seam allowance. And now that I have this pressed, I'm going to trim this down a little bit. Not too close. That looks good. And then just from the side, I don't know if you'll be able to see. Do you see how that folded edge peeks out a little bit? And I clip off just that corner. Just like that on both sides. And you can see here, again, I've used tailor tacks to mark my buttonhole on the collar. Alright, so now I'm going to put this piece aside for a minute. And I'm going to take the piece that is not interfaced, and I am going to place it on the outer edge of my shirt. This piece has a notch right here. You can see this notch right here, which gets a little confusing. There's a notch on your shirt right here at the center front. Those do not match. This notch on your collar piece matches this seam right here. And when you do that, you should have, I marked mine with chalk so you can see, your collar should be hanging over the edge of your shirt by 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so this notch matches up with the edge of your placket. So go ahead and pin this on. Alright guys, as soon as you get that all pinned on there, you're just going to go back to your sewing machine and sew that on. Alright, before we go any further, it's really important that you take a second to check and make sure you don't have any puckers or tucks in your seam there. Once that's done, make sure that your collar is even on both sides. You want to be sure when you lay this up that that seam right there is going to match. If not, those are the things you want to fix right now. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is put our collar in. Oh, sorry. Now you're going to want to trim and clip this seam before we go any further. Alright, that's the first part of our collar on. Now we are going to put the collar band. Now we're going to put the collar on. And for that, I'm going to turn this inside out. So this is the right side of my shirt. I want this side with the interfacing to be the public side. So it goes like this. So I am going to place that face up, and the 2 notches in the curved edge of your collar should match up with the very edge of your collar. Okay? Sorry, the notches at the top of your collar stand should match up with the edges of your collar piece. So just like that. And then you'll have a notch right here. A center notch right here. Another notch here. I'm going to take this pin out now. Here. And then again, this should match up right with that notch in the curve of your collar stand. All right, now I'm just going to go to the sewing machine. I'm not going to actually sew this yet. I'm going to base this down, and then we'll come back and do the other side of our collar stand. Okay, so we're just about done with our collar. We have, you can see what it looks like so far. All we have left is to put on our collar band. This to me is sometimes the trickiest part because it has curved edges that you want to look nice and even on both sides. To make sure that that is as accurate as possible, I always mark those with chalk. And then we're just going to stick this on here the same way we did the last piece. For this, I use a lot more pins because I want to be sure that I'm getting it all. They have a lot of layers here. You just want to be sure that they all lay nice and even on the edge. All right, once you get that all pinned in, you're just going to go to your sewing machine and you're going to start right here, right exactly where the collar meets the shirt, like right there. And then you're just going to go all the way around. This is why I like to have the chalk marks so that this curve and this curve look pretty close to the same. I also always use a smaller stitch for this edge. So for me, it's going to be about a 1.8 maybe. I think my regular stitch length is 2.4, so maybe a 1.8. Once I get to over here, then it'll just go back to its regular stitch length. Alright, so our collar is on. Before you do any trimming or clipping or anything, just take a look and make sure your seams look like the curves are pretty close to the same. So that's our collar pretty much finished. I have pressed this seam, I've trimmed it, and I've clipped into my corners. Now we're just going to fold this over to the inside, and in the instructions it says to hand stitch this down. I'm going to do a stitch in the ditch, and I'll show you that in just a second. But before you do that, either way, at these corners, when you go to lay your facing down, you see how this little bit is sticking out here? Just be sure that you're giving this a good trim. I like to get pretty darn close here. So that when you fold it over to the inside, you may have like a little bit to tuck up under there, but not very much. Okay, you see how a teeny little bit, we can stick that right under there. Okay, I'm going to do mine in, I'm going to stitch in the ditch on mine, so I am going to, from the right side, I'm going to start right here. I'm just going to pin all the way across, making sure that I catch the back of my collar facing as I go, and trying to keep it pretty flat. Alright, we're just going to pin that all the way across, and again, like I said, you're going to make sure you're catching it. See, I'm almost not catching it there. Make sure you're catching it all the way across, and then just stitch right in this seam right here. And then we'll move on to the sleeves. Okay, this is the wrong side of our sleeve. And this is where our little placket is going to go. They have you mark this in the center and cut it. That's just not the way I do it, so I'm going to show you how I do it, which is to mark my seam allowances, which are 1/4 of an inch at the bottom here, so you can see my slash. And I marked 1/4 of an inch on either side, and then I drew my line straight up to nothing at this point. And we're going to go ahead and cut right down the middle, right up to that point. This is my binding. This is the right side of my binding. It is folded in half and then one edge folded under. I'm going to put it right side up, and I want the edge that is not folded, and I am going to start right here at this edge. And I don't know if you'll be able to see, you can kind of see through here my the markings that I just made on the right side of my shirt. Sorry, the wrong side of my shirt. Now, I want 1/4 of an inch of my bias binding, but I'm not up here, it's getting narrower on my shirt, right? So I am actually going to have just a little bit of my bias binding hanging over the edge. I'm going to stitch this with black thread in a second, so you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Then I'm going to fold this out and continue on to the other side. Now at the bottom here, my edges are going to match. As I move towards the center, you're going to see more of my bias binding. So I'm going to go sew this down, and hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. The key is, start on this side, and as you sew, you're just going to have to keep moving this stuff out of your way, and then when you get to the center point, you're going to move this out of your way this way and continue on down that way, okay? I hope that makes sense, and I'll show you in just a sec. Okay, I hope you'll be able to see that. See, my black stitching goes along here. When you get right here, can you see this? This is the edge of my shirt right here, and this is the bias binding. So right here at this pivot point, I'm literally just catching the shirt, and that's fine because we're going to go over that again in 1 second. Now, on this case, I'm just going to put a little snip in the bias binding there, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to fold the bias binding, press this first. Fold this bias binding over the top so that it's just covering your stitch mark. Should have started on this side. This right here is the pivot point. You just want to be sure that your fabric is covering that line, okay? Right like that. And then you're just going to keep going. And now you're going to go back to your sewing machine and you're going to edge stitch this down. And again, you're just going to kind of lay it flat. But when you get to this midpoint where you see all this stuff is bunching up, you're just going to have to go slow and move this stuff out of your way as you come around. Okay? So it should look something like that from the right side. Okay? And obviously you won't be using contrasting stitching, or at least I don't recommend it, but you can see how that looks. Okay, now once that is done, you just push that all to the back, like this. And this is the front of my shirt, so you're going to fold this towards the front, like that, and give it a press. And then you're just going to open this out and you're just going to make a little stitch at an angle right here and just through your bias binding. It's going to go from the corner of the bias binding just out a little bit. And that's just going to help your bias binding stay in place. And then when you put your cuff on, it will be held down at the bottom in this place too, so you'll be fine. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Alright guys, we don't really have a lot more to show you on this. The only things you have left are to put your sleeves in. Those are put in via the flat method. So before you sew your side seams, if you're putting pockets in the sides, you're going to put those on. You're going to sew your side seams and your hem. If you're using the short sleeves, you will also be putting a pleat and a cuff in those, and that's it, aside from your buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and finish mine up. I am going to put my sleeves in. I'm using big patch pockets on mine, so I will do that before I do my side seams as well. And then we'll see how it looks. Alright guys, I appreciate you all sticking through that. I hope that you do find something helpful there. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Really quickly before I let you go, I will show you, this is my inspiration picture for this garment. And this is my finished dress. And I really, really like it. However, even though I feel like the length is pretty spot on to the inspiration picture, I feel like I might have liked it a little bit longer. I kind of like dresses that I'm not going to wear with pants to be like mid-calf. I think that's a funkier look, and I just like that better. But for the time being, this is absolutely fine. All right, the last thing I want to say is thanks to all your response on the Sinclair Patterns video. I did decide to go with the Sinclair Calypso t-shirt. And I am going to be doing that as a upcycle, a t-shirt upcycle. So hopefully I'll have that for you sometime around October 12th. All right, guys, I'm off to New York, and I will see you guys next week. Until then, I wish you all happy sewing.